Hello and welcome back to another episode of ABA Mom. I am your host, Allie, a board certified behavior analyst and mom of five. Today's episode is one of those topics that people either avoid or they may get very loud about: restraints, consent, and control. And I'm just going to be real with you that this is uncomfortable for a lot of people. I am going to give you the best behavior analytical perspective on this. And I think it's a very necessary conversation that I think is misunderstood quite often. So let's start here. So, a lot of conversations about restraints come from the motivation of the restraint. So, is it malicious? Is it punishment? So, a restraint should not be malicious. It should not be a punishment procedure. It is a safety procedure and it should be safety only. So, people trying to protect children or individuals, people trying to protect the autonomy of individuals, people reacting, they might be reacting from like a past trauma, people speaking in theory and not real life moments. So those don't really align with safety being the motivation, right? Safety should be the reason that we're doing it. And whether that is keeping the own individual safe, keeping yourself safe, or keeping others safe. So that should be the reason for the restraint. I don't go to work and say, hey, I hope I restrain somebody today. That is not the goal. The goal is to protect yourself and others and protect that individual. So that is the number one reason, is for protection and for safety. So not every decision a person makes is for their own safety, it's not for their own health, and it's not sustainable. So the question becomes between guidance and control. So let's talk about control, because I think that this is the real issue. So we love to talk about consent and control like they're simple, and they're not. So a lot of the things that we do, especially I'll just say from a parent's perspective, is against probably our child's will. For example, bedtime, school, brushing teeth, leaving the playground. Those are maybe against your child's will, right? But we do that and we justify us doing that as parents because we believe that it is in the best interest of their well-being, right? So brushing your teeth, healthy. We want them to have healthy teeth. We don't want them to have cavities. We don't want their teeth to fall out. Leave the playground. We can't live at a playground. We also have to go home. We can't sleep here, right? That wouldn't be safe if we just stayed at a playground all day. If we let kids do whatever they want and we don't ever exert any kind of control over what they do, they're going to like fly off roofs and things like that. So just, kids can do some very unsafe things, and it's our job as parents, speaking from a parent perspective, to protect them because we believe that this is what is in their best interest. Now, there are different types of control. So there is direct control versus indirect control. And I think this is where a lot of people may get confused. So we think we're either controlling or not controlling, but there's actually a couple different types of control here. So there is direct control. This is a physical and it's immediate. One of these can be holding a child back, blocking, restraining, direct control. So like physically controlling a situation. If a child is screaming and having a tantrum in the middle of the store, we remove them right from their source. We are physically picking them up and removing them from the store. If, they're throwing shoes at me, I might block them, restraining them, right? Because they are now a danger to themselves or others. Indirect control. So this can be things that you say like, I don't think that is a good idea. Well, you can if you want to, right? That's a form of indirect control. It's also an iPad timer, reward system. First this, then this, right? Or first then, as we like to say. Even your tone of voice can be a way of indirect control. You're not forcing the behavior, you're shaping a behavior. So here's a real life example. A traffic light doesn't physically stop your car. This is an example of indirect control. But you stop because you know that is a signal when it turns red. You know to stop your car, because what happens if you don't stop your car? You know the consequence. The consequence is somebody could hit you. You could get a speeding ticket, right? Those are two big ones. And that's the reason a lot of us stop our car, right? So you are under control indirectly of that traffic light. Now you can choose, you can make a choice to run through that red light. That may not be in your best interest. So indirect control even with an iPad, right? It's like you can say things like, you can turn off the iPad or I can turn off the iPad. So they're giving the choice, thinking that they're choosing to stop playing on the iPad, right? But this may be a system that you set up, right? Like, or using first then language. Okay. So, like, first we have to get through our homework, then we can play on the iPad. Okay, so that is something that you have set up in a reward system, and it is under the control and influence of your reward system. And I know a lot of people, and I don't even really like to say the word compliance too much because I feel like it doesn't sound pleasant. And I don't think everything needs to be compliance training. However, at some level, one thing that we use in ABA, we call stimulus control, is kind of just having control over the situation, things in the environment, and being able to say what's kind of going to come next. So, like a traffic light signals it's red. That is the stimulus control. Like, okay, so it's red, I'm going to stop my car. Teachers, some classroom with good classroom management skills, good stimulus control over that classroom. So at some level, things, especially when we talk about children, there is a level of compliance, but the same is true with adults, that there's some level of compliance. Not saying that we do want to protect their own autonomy and their own rights as well. Absolutely. And having the ability to say no to things. Absolutely. But I think as the adults, we need to see what is truly in the best interest of those individuals. Is jumping off of a roof with a Superman cape in the best interest of the child, even if they choose to? I think most would agree that is not. So we want them to comply with the direction of getting down off the roof, right? So we can walk on the ground, we can play superhero on the ground, maybe we can jump on a trampoline, right? So at some level, there is some kind of level of compliance. And I think that is knowing what should be compliance, which is usually because it's in their best interest, whether that's, health and safety, because everything else, it's like, like maybe doing your schoolwork. Okay. So that's like in your best interest, being able to do your schoolwork so you get a good grade at school. So those are good things to have because as parents, you believe that is in the best interest for your child, and the providers around you should also agree, like, okay, we're going to do the best thing for your child, like the best thing, for their well-being. Um, and as children grow, okay, so your direct control decreases. Sorry, parents, like it's absolutely true. Now have an 18-year-old and a almost 14-year-old. It does decrease as they get older. The world's reinforcement increases. So your direct control, you don't have the same direct control you used to. You're not going to carry them out of the store the same way. It's not going to look the same, physically prompting them to brush their teeth as they get older. And although sometimes maybe it still occurs, depending on your child's skill set, and if they are actually refusing to brush their teeth, but it does decrease over time. So you don't have the same control you did when they were younger as you do as they get older. The world and reinforcement increases. So friends, school, social approval, consequences, that's what starts shaping behavior. So if you think I'll never have control of my child, I think you're missing it, because someone or something always will. So someone or something always will. That's why, such a big emphasis on building a relationship and building rapport with your children, continuing to do that, and just being able to be there, be supportive, because as they get older, you're not going to have the same um, direct control that you did when they were younger. So restraints, back to restraints. What is a direct control? And here's the part that a lot of people don't like, is that not all restraints is bad. And restraints honestly shouldn't be bad. If I call, somebody, and this happened to me, I had to call, or I didn't call, but, somebody called the police on somebody I knew because they were having a moment after drinking and they had to be restrained by the police. So it's unfortunate. They did not have self-control. It was in the best interest of that individual. And you see it all the time, the restraints. So, and restraints can be a variety of different things. So yes, there's the restraints from the police. There's the restraints from providers, from medical professionals. There are also restraints that we use every day. So like when we swaddle a baby, that baby is restrained. The baby cannot move. The baby's movements are restricting, and that baby loves it, being restrained, swaddled. My little guy loved being swaddled. That was his favorite thing. That's the only way we could really get him to go to sleep, is when he was swaddled. So he was swaddled up really tight, and he loved that restraint. Some kids even still love like those, or adults love those weighted blankets. I personally love weighted blankets. Car seat is restraint. They are restricting movement. Holding a child's hand in a parking lot, actually, that's kind of a restraint. Grabbing a child before they run into the street, absolutely do it. Like, however you get them, get that child out of the street. I can't emphasize that enough. Please keep them safe. Again, for emphasis, and nobody would question that, right? If you had to restrain somebody because they were running out in the middle of their street before their safety. So, and that still goes for restraints. The way that they are supposed to be used is for safety. Because if you're coming, at me and you're like attacking me, or if you're attacking yourself, you're punching yourself in your head, or you're putting a hole in the wall, that's a great reason for restraint. For safety. It's for their safety, for your safety, for the safety of others. That is why we restrain. A restraint shouldn't be joyful. It's honestly just supposed to be a safety procedure. And it should never be a punishment. Like if you're like, if you don't stop, I'm going to restrain you, right? We don't need to use a restraint that way. And you don't ask them if a child is running out in the middle of the street or they're banging their head into a wall, repeatedly and their forehead's bleeding. You don't ask for their consent at that point. You can attempt to block first, right? You want to try to get them through it without a restraint if possible, but sometimes we have to move quickly because they are continuously hitting their head over and over again. It is time to restrain them. Running out in the street, you're not asking for consent, you're going to go get them. You act because safety overrides preference. Safety overrides it. And whatever you're doing with ABA, even if you're like, oh, this might be really reinforcing for them, we'll work through it. But right now, we've got to keep them safe. So once we figure out what kind of prevention strategies we can use, what kind of reactive strategies might be used better, but in the meantime, we've got to keep them safe. Even if that means in that moment, and there's been a couple where I'm like, it might be reinforcing, but we got to keep them safe. We can't just let them bash their head into a wall because it might be reinforcing if we don't stop it. If your child runs towards traffic, don't say, let's process your feelings first, right? You're not going to say that. Like, let's think about it. Let's think about all your feelings first, right? They're already out there. They're already in the traffic. Like, it is too late. And then it's like, next time, let's try this prevention strategy when they are stable functioning. Okay. Stable functioning. I like that word. I took it from when I used to use be a PCM instructor. Stable functioning. That basically calm. They're no longer engaging in those target behaviors. They're not running across the street. They're not having a tantrum. So that's a time to work on those skills. So you don't say, take deep breaths when somebody's angry. You practice it first. And then maybe you could use it when they're angry because it's a skill that they've learned and they've done over and over again. But if somebody's really angry and then for the first time, or maybe they practice deep breaths one time and you're like, take deep breaths, they're not going to do it. You have to practice it when they're not angry. Okay. Or if you use mindfulness or whatever, techniques that you might use, you can't do it in the moment. It's something that needs to be practiced before. And there's other prevention strategies that, you could be using, changing your environment. Do it when they're stable functioning or calm, right? That's the time to practice. And then maybe they can pick that up when they're upset. Okay. But probably not going to work when they're running in the middle of the road. I don't think deep breaths are going to help. Stop what that must be stopped immediately. That's not an intervention plan. That's protection. Most of the time, my husband goes to get the baby shots and has to hold him down for the shots. And he's crying and all that stuff. And it's like, why do we do that? Because he is getting a vaccination, because we believe that's in the best interest. So whatever you're doing things for your child because you believe it's in their best interest. And then afterwards, you're still like, thank you to the doctors. Like, hey, thanks. Thank you so much for your help. Why? Because it's necessary. It's temporary and it's necessary. It was done to help and it's not control long-term. It's very temporary. And so should restraints. Restraints should be temporary. Restraint is not a teaching tool. It's not. You're not learning a skill. It's not a behavior plan. It's not a punishment. It is a reactive strategy for safety. It should be immediate, safety-based, short-term, and a last resort. Where it goes wrong is, let's not ignore it, is the misuse of restraints. Some people act out of frustration or malice and not out of safety. Some people out there may want to cause harm, and that's real. And that's why we need to have training, ethics, oversight, accountability, not denial. And the bigger question, instead of asking, should restraint ever happen? Is it necessary? Is it truly for safety? Is it the least restrictive option in this moment? Is this what we need to do? If a child's running the street, is that what we need to do? Yep, absolutely. Does a child or adult regain autonomy immediately afterwards? Yes. Final thoughts. You are not to control an individual forever. This should be a very temporary state for restraint. You're not trying to keep them safe long enough to learn how to control themselves, because one day you won't be there. And even if you are, working with a client, like, you're not always going to be there, right? And we can work, like I said, prevention strategies, work on the strategies before. Okay. You can't just do it in the moment. Like, you have to, something that you have to practice. So deep breaths, we've got to practice that when we're calm. So I know that this is a very hard conversation. I find it a very necessary conversation. Thank you so much for listening and for your time today. And just remember, you are not in this journey alone.